I'd like to welcome you all to the League of Women Voters Candidate Forum, and we're going to also follow that with a analysis and discussion of the propositions, both for June and also kind of looking ahead to the general election in the fall. I'm Carol Burr, Voter Service Director for the League of Women Voters, and you may have noticed this is a service that the League has been offering for many, many years. We appreciate your coming, and we appreciate the fact that many of you have gotten your mail ballots already. This is a very important primary on June 8th, and it's good to know what you're voting for, rather than just voting out of straight emotion or something like that. This is brought to you in partnership with the Chico Enterprise-Record, and we very much appreciate the support that the ER has given us, that both in terms of financial support, since it's getting more expensive to do everything, and also for help in thinking about the best way to present the forums. Tonight we're going to be hearing from the candidates for Butte County District Attorney. We have 3 candidates, but 2 are going to be participating tonight, Mike Ramsey and Lance Daniel. Dale Rasmussen elected not to participate tonight. And as I said, that'll be followed by a discussion of the propositions. We are going to have an interaction between questions from you, the audience, and questions from the media panel. David Little from the Chico Enterprise-Record, Melissa Doherty. Okay. The Irish I wanted to make it Doherty, but she says I can't do that. From the Chico News and Review, and Tom Gascoigne from North State Public Radio. We very much appreciate their support as well. Our media team is going to be Linda McMichael, will be moderating tonight. I'll be screening the questions. We want the questions to be framed neutrally. You may have someone you really care about. Try to frame the questions so that both candidates can answer and it doesn't look as though we're trying to do them harm. The greeter is Betsy Kruger, our illustrious president of the League of Women Voters. Linda Furr is our page. Where is Linda? Okay, and she will pick up your index cards with the questions on them, and obviously we'll not get to all of them. I already have, someone gave me 10, I think, at the beginning of this session. So, and also Mary Peterson will be picking up questions. Thank you. Our timekeepers, very important people, Linda Lunsford and Jane Wanderer. These are the people who tell you when your time is running out, and then they stop you mid-sentence if you haven't stopped. So we do want to keep to our time. We're going to allow a 2-minute opening statement and a 2-minute closing with questions in between. We'll spend an hour with the 2 candidates. Please, no applause. We can applaud for both candidates when the session is over, but please note. And if you have a cell phone, put it on vibrate, please. Okay, tonight we're live on Channel 11, which if you have Comcast, it will also be rebroadcast. The couple of the ones we'll be having, the 3 of them on the 25th, 26th, and 27th of May at 7 p.m. So if you're a Comcast user, Channel 11 is the way to go. The other really nice service that the Enterprise-Record is offering is streaming. So if you go to chicoer.com/multimedia, that should get you to all 3 of the forums. The 3rd was the supervisors, the 5th was U.S. Congress, State Senate, and State Assembly. And this is really very nice. You will hear some analysis of these forums and of the candidates on North State Public Radio. Okay, so without further ado, we'd ask the 2 candidates to go sit up in front, and it'll be. We did a coin toss, although I'm turned out to have no talent for it. But in any case, Mike Ramsey will begin as the opener and will also be the first one to do the closing. So here we go.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting this. My name is Mike Ramsey. I'm the Butte County District Attorney. Now, my top priority is keeping Butte County safe by fighting the growing threat of gang violence, reducing consumer fraud, and protecting elders and children. Now, I was born and raised in Butte County. I love this community. I have personally prosecuted hundreds of trials, including death penalty murder. Now, this experience is vital in leading the Butte County District Attorney's Office and in protecting the citizens of Butte County. Now, my office has created nationally recognized programs for drug-endangered children, drug courts which focus on rehabilitation, a bad check program which has returned over $3.8 million to the local businessmen, and an environmental protection unit which is safeguarding the public's health. Now, to do justice, as no one is above the law nor beneath its protection. Now, those are the words that I have built my 22 years as district attorney. Now, I've dedicated my career and the resources of my office to make sure that justice is done, no matter who the offender or the victim may be. Everyone deserves to be protected from crime, just as everyone deserves to have their constitutional rights protected. Experience does matter, and I ask for your vote in helping keep Butte County a safe and beautiful place in which to live. Thank you.
Well, my name is Lance Daniel.
Is that green light on?
I don't see it on.
Okay.
How about that? Everyone hear me now? Usually people say my voice carries, so I don't often have to have a microphone. Thank you all for taking time out of your busy lives to come down and learn some information about both candidates and make an informed decision. As I said, my name is Lance Daniel. I've been practicing law 21 years, and during the course of that 21 years, I've handled, I estimate, about 12,000 cases, cases including civil, criminal, administrative, family law, and some probate. Along the way, I've had cases that got national press, one in Los Angeles involving a conspiracy to practice medicine without a license that went on for a number of years. Another 14-count felony case that went on for many years, also made the national press. And it was a trial in which I worked with the finest jury consultant in the country, in my opinion, the best sentencing experts, and I've had a very broad-based experience in that I have handled cases throughout multiple counties in California, from Southern California, Central, and Northern California. I have a desire to be your district attorney because this is a beautiful area, and Chico in particular is something that meets all of my needs. I'm an avid cyclist. I know this town is custom made for that. It's a beautiful community. People have been very friendly to me. And as the district attorney, I want to do a number of things. One is I want to focus the limited resources on crimes such as crimes of violence, property and theft related crimes, and I also want to not waste any more taxpayers' money with frivolous prosecutions. Thanks for your attention today.
Thank you, gentlemen. We have quite a few questions from the audience, so we thought we would just jump right in. You'll each have 2 minutes to answer the questions. Mr. Daniel, we will start with you. The first question, how would you prioritize the resources of the DA's office in prosecuting and implementing laws on 1, marijuana, 2, DUIs, 3, domestic violence, and 4, victimless crimes?
Okay, so the first one was marijuana. I believe that there is a legitimate role for medicinal use of marijuana. However, sales of marijuana are not legal under the current law. What is legal is described in the Attorney General's opinion as to the law. Collectives are legal, cooperatives are legal, and certainly if people cooperate with the law there, I am willing to work with the community to try to reach a resolution under the law for medicinal marijuana. The second one was DUIs. I believe the penalty for multiple offenders is too low. I would bring the penalties in line with Placer County, another county that I've practiced in extensively, for multiple offenders. The highways around here, 70, 99, and others are areas where drunk drivers injure and kill people all the time. And I personally have been affected by that throughout my lifetime. The third one was domestic violence. Domestic violence is a crime of violence, and that goes to the top of the priorities because with the resources we have, we must stop violent crimes. And there was a last one? Victimless It depends on what you mean by a victimless crime. And am I out of time? No. Is there an example, or is it just a general victimless crime? Well, I need to know what a victimless crime is. Sometimes people say prostitution is a victimless crime, but it's not really, because both persons are victims in a way. One person is a victim that is the John, the other person is a victim that is the streetwalker, for example. And so I don't really consider that generally, when they call it a victimless crime, a victimless crime. I see my time is almost up.
Thank you. Mr. Ramsey?
Thank you. Well, I used to be a reporter, and there's a statement there that if it bleeds, it leads. And that's basically the priority that we have now. If there is a violent crime, that is where most of our priority is put. In terms of victimless crimes, and we'll put that in with the marijuana also, because many people think that drug crimes are victimless crimes. Couldn't be farther from the truth. There's no specific victim in a drug crime such as that we name in a complaint. However, the victims of drug crimes is our community and the people that are affected, not only the suspect themselves, but also the family of that suspect and the victims of that suspect's thievery to support that drug habit. That's why I fully support and have instituted in our county the drug court program. That drug court program seeks to turn addicts who commit crimes into people that will no longer commit crimes because it deals with their addiction. Domestic violence, by its very nature, is one of the crimes that we have as a priority. It's one of my specialized units, prosecution and investigatory units, that we take very seriously, have sought over the years a number of grants to expand. And DUI, another crime that is very, very dangerous. Multiple DUIs, fourth DUI under the law is prosecuted as a felony, and we always have done that here in Butte County. Thank you.
We'll take one more question from the audience, and this question has to do with gang violence. And Mr. Ramsey, why don't you start?
Gang violence is something that is of concern to our community. Gang violence, there's between 700 and 800 documented gang members in Butte County. Most of our unsolved murder cases are gang cases. Gang violence is not going to be solved merely from prosecuting just the gang bangers, but looking at a more holistic approach. And that's what we have done in reaching out to the various parents, schools. Just 2 weeks ago, I was at a middle school educating the parents on what to look for in recognizing whether their students, their children, were falling prey to the gangs. The fact that you've got a child with red shoelaces, a red belt, and a red hoodie causes you to have some concern. Now, I also is a founding member of our gang task force, which is a collaboration of the various police agencies, all of the police agencies in the county, that go from one area to the other area when there is a gang problem that pops up, and we very aggressively do gang prosecutions to make sure that this community is kept safe. And I'm proud of the fact that this community's gang problem is not to the extent of some of our surrounding counties. Thank you.
Gang violence is very serious. I think everybody knows that. It's one of the #1 things on people's minds when I've talked with them, and here in Chico and other places. Gang violence is something that is going to require a multiple disciplinary approach to it. It has to start with stopping people from wanting to go into gangs. Young people don't have the kind of judgment of somebody with more sound reasoning like an adult. They don't see another way out of the area that they're in. And I've talked with community members and people that want to work in a way to educate the young people that this is not the way to go, that there is hope for you, there's another way that's better for you. Otherwise, if you go down that road, you're going to end up in state prison or dead. And that is a very serious matter that we should apply resources to. A lot of the homicides are there. There's a lot of drug-related activity with these gangs. That's why I want to focus on drug trafficking, because if you can cut out drugs for most crimes, you're cutting down the gang-related, the theft-related, the violent-related crimes. Drugs go all the way across the board. And that is a focus that I believe, if in conjunction with the gangs and the drug-related targeting, will reduce their activity here, and educating the new ones so they don't become members. One idea that's worked well is you take OGs, original gang members that have left it, and they go out themselves and help educate the new ones. Hey, here's what happened to me. This is my experience. You're going the wrong way. Let me show you a better way. And we need to work with all of those avenues to try to cut that activity down. Thank you.
Ms. Doherty, we'll move over to you. If you'd like to direct your question to Mr. Ramsey first. And gentlemen, you have 2 minutes to answer.
Mr. Ramsey, I'd like to ask you what most concerns you about the Chico City Council's draft medical marijuana ordinance.
What most concerns me about that draft is the fact that there is a definition of dispensaries that may not be in comport with the law. And that fact of allowing collectives or cooperatives to do more than just cultivate or distribute to members is a problem. And that definition may be a fatal flaw in that particular ordinance. It's also a fact in terms of doing an ordinance, it's a concern of making sure that there isn't a feeling that by allowing something, you are actually legitimizing that. Mr. Daniel and I both agree under the Attorney General's guidelines that storefront dispensaries have very little legs to stand on as being legal.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that? Yes. Recently, an associate of yours spoke at the Chico City Council meeting, and he indicated that you viewed dispensaries as illegal operations. SB 40, the companion bill to Prop 215, the Compassionate Use Act, allows for reasonable compensation, it's called, to be given to medical marijuana caregivers, that is growers and providers. So I wanted to know, if not money, what type of compensation would you consider legal under the law?
Actually, reasonable compensation under SB 420 goes only to caretakers. It does not go to dispensaries, and it's very clear in the law that that is not something that can be done to compensate dispensaries that now call themselves collectives or cooperatives. That in 420 was put there for caretakers. Those are the folks that can caretake or supply marijuana, medical marijuana, for medical marijuana purposes to those too sick to grow for themselves. What we see with storefront dispensaries are people that are fairly healthy who are coming in and supposedly joining up with the dispensary on the spot to buy marijuana. In my estimation and in the Attorney General's estimation, that is illegal.
Is that something that should be taken up by the state?
Well, it has been taken up by the state. That's a state law. I represent the people of the state of California. That's my function.
So dispensaries and collectives cannot be considered caregivers in any way?
In the case of People versus Minch, about a year and a half ago, the California Supreme Court spoke on that very specifically and said that dispensaries are not caretakers. A caretaker is that person that consistently supplies care for the health, safety, or housing of a person, much like an IHSS worker, not a club.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Daniel, would you like her to repeat the question, or?
Well, there were multiple parts to it, so
Okay.
we could just start with the first part.
Are you familiar with the Chico City Council's draft medical marijuana ordinance?
I'm familiar with it, but while I agree that we have to look to the Attorney General's opinion as to the current state of the law, my approach with the City Council would be different. I would want to work with the City Council. They have every right to ask legal authority to try to figure out if their ordinance is within the law or not. And I would do that in a non-confrontational manner and in a spirit of cooperation under the law so that we can reach a resolution to this problem, because barring changes in the law, which I would go with because I'd be sworn to uphold the law, there's an issue, it must be resolved, and if people are willing to work towards that goal, I'm willing to work with them. Now, yet another part. I think.
That was related to the this reasonable compensation. So I asked Mr. Ramsey what would be considered reasonable compensation under the law. If it's not money, what are you going to give to people who are caregivers?
Well, there are people that can't grow their own. They don't have the capability. They aren't physically able to do it. They don't have the resources for whatever reason. And so you have to very carefully account for how much it costs for things. Okay, and so if you're going to operate these collectives or cooperatives legally, you have to know exactly what the fertilizer, the electric, the lights, the security, and all that stuff is, and figure out the reasonable amount. Now, I've had people from Safe Access and from NORML, you're familiar with NORML, National Organization to Reform Marijuana Laws, say that, well, these are nonprofit entities, and as a nonprofit entity, people that run them are allowed a reasonable compensation for running an entity. That is something that has to be worked out within the law.
So do you support the nonprofit model?
I believe the nonprofit model is workable. I also know that in other jurisdictions, the concerns about theft and problems with these dispensaries have not been realized. Chief of Police Brazil, a little south of here in Sacramento, just said, we're not seeing the problems we thought would happen. So that has to be kept in mind. You can look to other jurisdictions to see what their experience is and hopefully incorporate that here to come up with a good resolution. Okay.
Mr. Gascoigne and Mr. Daniel, why don't you start?
Okay, Mr. Daniel, you've had experience with something called remote viewing. As I understand it, you were actually, at one time, maybe still are the director of something called the Psi Squad. And as I understand it, it's the use of psychic ability to help solve crimes. And I know that there was recently a story in the News and Review concerning the very same thing, local law enforcement or up in Tama County possibly using it. Does it really work? And would you use it as a district attorney?
Okay, first of all, let's define what that is. It's just a tool. It's no more than a tool. It's not a substitute for good investigation, okay? I'm a skeptic of this. I started out as a skeptic. I'm still skeptical. People say something, but I live in a world where I need something that's tangible, something that you present to the senses that I can see and touch and feel and take into a courtroom, okay? Now, remote viewing is a term that was coined by a fellow named Ingo Swann as part of the Cold War and the military's effort to create a technology through two scientists principally at Stanford Research Institute. This technology has been defined and used in what they call a special access program. Other people commonly call them black programs, from 1972 to 1995. In order to be funded each year for that, the Senate subcommittees on intelligence had to go and show that the data they collected was effective. That had to go all the way up to the White House, so presidents from Carter all the way up through Clinton approved of it. Now, in 1995, it was disclosed, it was declassified, and they thought the reason is that we don't really have a Cold War going on. All right. It's commonly used by law enforcement. It's commonly used by the military to bring soldiers home, and the FBI uses it as well. They used it in the Chandra Levy case, which is the probably most infamous missing person case in the United States at the time. And I think that you should use any tool possible if you have a missing child. That's reasonable to bring that child back safely.
Mr. Ramsey, let me put the question this way. Have you ever been involved in a case as a prosecutor in which evidence was gathered in this way through remote viewing and admitted into court?
Have I ever?
Yes, in any of
Never.
your dealings with, yes.
Never.
Never had any, in your
Never.
prosecutions, the defense has never brought in?
Remote viewing?
Yeah, or
No.
yes, anything like that?
No. I evidently do not have any psychic powers. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't be here. I'd already divine what the outcome of the election would be, stay home. No, they.
Well,
I know Mr. Daniel has, and I've seen on the web, the international World Wide Web, where he has done some remote viewing on the submarine Kursk when it blew up, and I don't have such powers.
Well, I know that there was a story in the news review recently that I think it was the sheriff's department or in Tehama County that they were, a woman who had visions went and talked to them and whether they're using that information or not to locate a body that's been missing for a long time. And so I think they entertained the notion of it. I guess, as you say, it's a tool, and you'll take anything in that, you know.
I received a call from a woman based upon that story who said that that story was false. It was actually her and her psychic ability. I did probably like most law enforcement and humored her, and then moved on with some more important things that were on my desk.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Little, the next question is yours, and Mr. Ramsey, you may start.
I'd like to know your positions on prosecuting environmental crimes and code enforcement violations in the county, and also in particular, if you could talk about a specific case on the Dry Creek drainage and your perceptions of what went on in that prosecution.
Okay. My position in terms of environmental prosecutions, and let me kind of preface it with the fact that we prosecute some 10,000 cases a year in our office. Environmental cases run between 10 and 20 of those cases a year. But as a son of a game warden, I am very concerned about our environment, but I'm more concerned about our public health. And the cases that we prosecute in terms of environmental crime are largely on those cases in which toxic dumping goes on our land or in our water, and actually does endanger our public health. Dry Creek drainage is a case that is still going on in our court. What happened was a particular rancher, farmer, entrepreneur there took one section of the Dry Creek drainage, basically made a 2,000-foot ditch that dewatered the upper reach of an upper arm of Dry Creek, causing an entire riparian forest to die. And that type of prosecution is also important when we destroy our environment in that manner. Code enforcement in the regulatory community does pretty well in terms of their own prosecution over in the administrative area. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, first of all, we have Irvlene's Ditch, which I think is something that's been pretty popular, and it's been out there. This is somebody who owned a piece of property, and he sold it to another, and that other took garbage out of this ditch, a ditch that had been there since 1907, and a ditch where if he paid $150 from the state to get a permit, which he didn't need, there would have been no problem. You want people to remove garbage like car batteries and motors and televisions from a ditch. To spend 7.5 years and 67 court appearances over that, when somebody is removing garbage from a ditch, is a complete waste of taxpayers' money and time. It gets into the point of just ego. They're just going to keep after somebody for doing something they didn't do wrong at all. If you look at these things, it's nice to state policies, and sure, if somebody's dumping toxic waste into the Feather River, you want to go after those people because you don't want that. Everyone wants clean air and clean water. But when you go after somebody that's a rancher or a farmer, and you say, those pits there from those peaches, why, they have arsenic in them, and they could get in the soil, and that could go down through impermeable soil into water, and could get, That is a bunch of speculation. There's no evidence to that. And when that same farmer cooperates with the authorities and moves these things to a cement tarmac and puts an ash berm around it to dry them down so we can give them to the power plant so that they can generate electricity from it, and is told you're fully compliant, and the prosecutor's office continues at him, and ultimately they both part ways after they cost him tens of thousands of dollars, is another waste of taxpayers' money. Yes, we have to protect the environment, but we have to have evidence first that something is happening to that environment. It's much better to go to a farmer, rancher, or businessman and inform them, hey, A shouldn't be stored next to B. Did you know you're doing this? Let's try to work together and get cooperation first, and that way we can get compliance, because compliance is what we want.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel. I'll give you an opportunity to keep talking, but on a different topic. Oh, okay, we'll return to our questions from the audience. And according to this card, the district attorney's annual budget is $10 million a year with over 100 employees. And we would like to know what management experience you will bring to managing this large organization. And we'll start with you, Mr. Daniel.
Okay, well, first of all, I majored in business administration, so that requires you to study management, finance, budgeting, taxes, etc. Second of all, I've run my own practice for 19 years, which requires me to do all of that. That budget is almost all salaries and benefits. You have a budget that's more or less similar year after year after year after year. And there's an organizational structure involved in improving these expenditures. There are people that work in that office that assist with that. It doesn't really take a financial wizard to figure that one out. It's not like a business that has multiple inventories and you have to account via first in, last out, and account for all those things. It's just salaries and benefits and some other expenses. In addition, that budget has to be approved. So anything I do would have to be approved and supervised. It's not like somebody comes to your house with $10 million in gold coins on January the 1st and dumps it off and say, don't spend it all in one place. And the second question was the management of the employees. There is an organizational structure in place already. The Attorney General doesn't supervise all thousands of his employees. That's just not how it works. That organizational structure, clerical staff, investigators, etc., they have supervisors. And those people already know their jobs and how to do their jobs. The goal of the district attorney is to guide that office and make the right decisions so that the resources that are limited are applied in the area that makes the most difference for public safety in this community.
Thank you. I do administer a budget of $10 million and nearly 100 employees. I've done it for 22 years. And I've brought in that budget on time and on budget or under for those 22 years. Unfortunately, Mr. Daniel shows a bit of an ignorance of how complex county or governmental budgeting actually is. You have to deal with internal service funds, A87, which is the overhead, indirect cost rate, double accounting from the auditor's office, indirect cost rates, pensions that still are on the books, GASP. All of those things are fairly complex, and you must know this to be able to talk to not only the Board of Supervisors, but more importantly, the CAOs, or the Chief Administrative Officer's office, and their deputies in crafting a budget. You don't just start with a budget each year. Butte County, we have what we call zero-based budgeting. You basically do have to start and justify each of those items. My employees, I am very proud of. Those employees have been with me for many, many years, and I believe there's a reason for that in the environment in which we have crafted around those employees. Thank you.
Thank you. Another question from the audience. We would like to hear from each of you about your professional accomplishments that make you the right person for this job. And Mr. Ramsey, we will start with you.
Well, thank you. Well, professional accomplishments in the sense of having passed the bar in the first time. I'm a member of the state bar. You have to be the district attorney, obviously. I was in the office for some 10 years, working my way up to chief deputy, doing a lot of that budget and supervision work before I was appointed as district attorney in 1987, and have subsequently run for this office each of those times. I've received a number of awards in terms of professional accomplishments and some of the programs that we've done. Our Drug Endangered Children's Program, our Child Abuse Response Team Program, our Domestic Violence Program. All of those programs have to have a budget. They have to have various grants that we have to administer to make sure that the Butte County buck goes not only far, but goes further than just the local money will allow us to go. Just this year, in terms of accomplishments, I have been named the Distinguished Citizen of the Year by the Boy Scouts of America. I was named the Outstanding Victim Advocate of the Year by the Probation Department's Victim Witness Program. And I was named Conservation Leader of the Year by River Partners. Those are just some of the accomplishments.
Thank you. I touched on them a bit in my opening remarks, but in my 21 years of practice, I've seen all sides. I have represented people that bring lawsuits. I've represented people that need to defend those lawsuits that are brought against them. I have arbitrated. I've been a judge pro tem. I have taught legal ethics and civil procedure at paralegal colleges. I was invited into the American Inns of Court, the Anthony M. Kennedy Inns of Court. Anthony M. Kennedy is on the United States Supreme Court and was a professor at the law school I went to. And that is a very prestigious organization. That particular section of it is the flagship in the country. And during my tenure there, they let you in for 3 years. I won Best Presenter each year of 3 years, and they invited me to stay an extra year in addition, and they continue to re-invite me back. I have handled conservatively 12,000 cases, some of them simple, some of them very complex. Cases involving accident reconstructionists, DNA experts, toxicologists, sentencing experts, jury selection experts, lots of medical doctors involving spine and injury and all kinds of conditions. And these are ones where I've done 5 to 1,000 depositions. Those are things that require preparation to cross-examine and ask the good questions and get out the right information. I have investigated many, many, many cases throughout my practice because good investigation is what leads to a good result. That's important to me, is sound, good investigation. Thank you. And in addition to that, I have done charity work quietly, spent my own money to try to bring justice to victims of crimes, or for families of victims of crimes. Thanks.
Mr. Little, we'll take a question from you, and why don't you select whom you would like to answer first?
Okay, we'll start with Mr. Daniel. There's been a lot of interest in how you were introduced to Butte County and by whom. Maybe you can shed a little bit of light on that.
Sure. I was doing my radio talk show, which I did on Saturdays for about 3 years, and that particular Saturday was 4th of July. I was invited over to the station owner's house for a 4th of July picnic. While I was there, people were mentioning the Butte County District Attorney's office and was asking if I knew anything about running up there and wanted to know if I wanted to look into it. And I said, well, I'll think about it. And so as I thought about it, I thought, you know, I've always thought if I had the chance to be the district attorney, I would take it, because private attorneys can help the few that come to you. But the district attorney can help a whole community by setting the right policies and doing justice for people and seeing that these policies carry forward. So that's one factor. The second one was that it's the right time in my personal and professional life. I've been practicing over 20 years. I was thinking I'm going to be 50 here in September. Do I want to continue to do what I'm doing in my private practice that I started with $800 and a borrowed desk and no cases? I've done everything I want to do in that private practice. It's time to do something else that can give back. The third factor is that I met some people that started telling me stories. And at first I was like, okay, it's a story, but I met so many people that were so earnest and so sincere about the difficulty they've had with the current administration that I said, you know, I can make a difference here. And finally, by going around the county and spending months doing it and hiking up to Table Mountain and all, I started saying, this is a beautiful area. Chico in particular is a wonderful town. It's almost like you shouldn't tell people about it because you don't want it to get overcrowded.
And Mr. Ramsey, I guess you could talk about what you did to bring this on, or if you'd rather take it in another direction, you can talk about why it, if it matters, that that somebody from out of the area is running as a new resident.
Well, I think it does. In the sense what I've just heard Mr. Daniel say is, I think, should be concerning to the people of Butte County. We just heard him say that he talked down there about running up here. You've just heard him say that the DA can help a whole community. Absolutely, and that's what I've been doing for the last 32 years of my professional career. We just heard him say it was the right time in his life to run for DA in a county in which he has never been or practiced law. It is important that a DA, the kind of chief policymaker, be a member of the community, to know the community members, to know local law enforcement, to know the local judiciary, to know the local community groups, to know the local departments that need to have someone that is there, knows the fair and consistent with the prosecutions that we do. Mr. Daniel said the third factor was that he had met some people, and it's obvious from what we've read in the newspapers, he's met some people that I have prosecuted. And I've prosecuted and convicted. Those people are upset with that prosecution. I am not beholden to any special interest. Thank you.
Ms. Doherty, and you also may select your person.
Okay. Some of my questions are stolen, so go in a different direction here. Mr. Daniel, can you expound on your idea of forming a volunteer citizen advisory panel and what the purpose of that group would be?
Certainly, the Citizens Advisory Panel that I want to have, first of all, it's volunteer, so it doesn't cost any money. There are 5 districts. I want to have a member of law enforcement from each district, then 2 citizens from each district, and they would serve on it voluntarily for about a year, and we'd meet regularly. And the idea is to give a voice to people in the community as to how the resources are being spent for law enforcement. The desires and the needs of Chico are different than the ones down in Gridley Biggs, who, for example, they're worried about agricultural theft. Someone steals Roundup or something, which are different again from people in Oroville, which are different again from people up in Paradise, Magalia, et cetera. So I want to give everybody a voice so that I can get feedback from them as to what areas they would like to have law enforcement target. Now, we know the sheriffs have a DAD program, a designated area deputy for that, and with limited resources and coming from the private sector, I want to make sure they're used efficiently. And I want them to know that I can respond to their concerns as well. It's not a watchdog group, okay? It's an advisory panel to make sure that the citizens have a voice and that I'm not just sitting there saying, I know better than you about what needs to be done. You guys know better too. Let's work together.
The second part of my question would be, based on your previous question before me, which Mr. Little asked, I wanted to ask, how can the residents of Butte County be assured that you will protect the health and vitality of the natural environment?
Because I'm very concerned about it myself. I'm a cyclist. I like going out in areas that are pristine. It brings me joy. I know farmers and ranchers and cattlemen. I know they're the custodians of the land, and they would not do anything to harm their land intentionally. And I know you can work with them. I'm proud to have their endorsement. And they've endorsed me. There are 3,000 members, just like all the people that have put up yard signs for me Those are people that are endorsing me, people that have spoken for me. It's not one small group. That Farm Bureau and every other individual throughout this county is saying that they want to change for the better, and they know that I will protect the environment, but I'm not going to spend money saying that somebody's a criminal enterprise because of an environmental situation unless we're sure that's true. And in my review of what's gone on over the years, the evidence isn't there. So it's good to have a policy, but you got to look at results. And I want to get the right results. I can get that through cooperation. Cooperation will get you compliance. And people that don't want to comply, after we give them a reasonable time, then we can bring the hammer down on them on those environmental crimes.
Okay.
Sure. Thank you very much. In terms of the Citizens Advisory Panel, I think that that's a very good idea for someone that is not a member of the community, because it would give you an idea of what the community wants. You need to reach out if you don't have an idea of what's going on in your community. The idea of having a police officer from each of the various 5 supervisory districts, little unwieldy, because those districts are overlapping with the Orville Police Jurisdiction, the Paradise Police Jurisdiction, even the Chico Police Jurisdiction, which has 2 supervisory districts. And every month I have a meeting with law enforcement, and the heads of law enforcement that we have our law enforcement administrators meeting, which is every law enforcement administrator in the county, from local, state, and federal authorities that come to a meeting. We have lunch and discuss the various issues that do affect Butte County. Now, I'm not a bicyclist, but I'm a hunter, a fisherman, a scuba diver, and I very much love this particular area. It should be noted in the Farm Bureau, on the board of directors, there are people that have been and are being prosecuted. So I think that there's a problem, perhaps, in that recommendation or endorsement. But farmers, and I've known a lot of farmers over a lot of years, do support me, and I have a number of endorsements from individual farmers, and that's almond farmers. Notice I put almond, not almond. Farmers, rice farmers, walnut, and so forth. In compliance, just real quickly, we do give people that commit environmental crime that chance. We give them a notice. It's a public nuisance notice for them to clean up first before any action is done. And fully 3/4 of our environmental cases are resolved without bringing any sort of action, criminal action against the person. Thank you.
Mr. Gascoigne.
Mr. Daniel, you've said that the Butte County DA's office has one of the lowest conviction rates in the state. Can you expand on that?
Well, anyone can go to ag.ca.gov, attorneygeneral.california.gov. You can look at the 10-year conviction rate for every county, and you can compare Butte County to the other counties, and you can see it's among the lowest in the state. It's as simple as that.
Mr. Ramsey, can you respond?
Yeah. There's lies, damn lies, and statistics. Unfortunately, this is one of those beyond a lie. Because even looking at the figures, the Department of Justice figures, Butte County is right in the middle of the pack, right in the middle of all of the 58 counties. We're number 35 if you discount, or if you count it in raw numbers. If you're within 2 percentage points, we're number 28. So right in the middle of that pack. Also, it should be noted that the way of figuring the Department of Justice figures by cases. So if you take a dismissed case out, and that's what they do, they subtract it from the 100% cases, what occurs is then you get supposedly your conviction rate. A higher dismissal rate means presumably a lower conviction rate. Dismissals are given in Butte County as a reward for successfully completing the drug court or Prop 36 court. So that's not someone that goes free. That person has already been convicted. They've done the work necessary to graduate from the court and are now successfully released by a dismissal of the crime or the charge against them. So if you look at the cases that have on the Judicial Council, Butte County, which is counted by defendant, Butte County is ahead of the state average. And we're pretty proud of that.
Okay, we have another question, and Mr. Daniel, we'll start with you. And this concerns the image of the district attorney's office with business owners in Butte County. So the question is, one, do you believe that the image needs to be improved? And two, if you do, how would you go about it?
The image is not the factor. The conduct is the factor of the district attorney's office with respect to businesses, farmers, and ranchers. Like I've said many times, you want to get compliance and you don't want to waste taxpayer money on frivolous cases that go nowhere. One way to get compliance is to go out and talk with these businesses. When you have a code enforcement officer that just goes out and writes tickets to companies that maybe they weren't aware they needed a permit because they have 9 mixing gases for welding and, oh, well, you need a permit for that. Or maybe they weren't aware that maybe A shouldn't be stored next to B, or the spring tension on some door is too heavy and it closes too fast. These are the kind of things that when you pepper businesses and you engage in activity that's waterboarding businesses, particularly in this day and age with a high unemployment rate, with these kind of things where you're just out there writing tickets, collecting money, not giving anybody a chance, these are the kind of things that I'm going to change, because I'm going to tell businesses who employ people here and pay taxes here, taxes that pay for fire and police and all the necessary services, we're going to give you a chance to come into compliance. You don't take that chance, then you're going to get that ticket, okay? If you do come in compliance, we're going to be fair with you. And you know what that's going to happen? Businesses are going to go, this man treats us fair. He's impartial. He's not just out there trying to get money for his office and for these other services. And because of that, I think we'll stay here, and we'll continue to employ people here, and we'll expand here. Nevada, no thank you. Utah, we don't have to. We'll stay right here. We're happy where we're at. We don't need to be driving businesses out at the time where unemployment is on its way up.
Thank you. And I agree. And in no way have we driven any businesses out of Butte County. Like I say, Mr. Daniel says, like he says many times, I've heard this in this campaign, and it's particularly distressing and reflects back to goals, that if you say something loud enough and long enough, that perhaps some people start believing it. We are not business unfriendly in the Butte County District Attorney's Office. Never are, never have been. Regulation of businesses that Mr. Daniels speaks to are regulatory agencies. That's an administrative ticket. That is a ticket that is given over in the administrative courts, not in the criminal courts. Cases that find their way to the criminal court are cases that are the most egregious cases. These are cases that are done so that legitimate businessmen that are actually making the effort to comply with the law, have a level playing field. What would we have in this county or in any society if we had favored people? We say, no, that's okay, you particular business, you can violate the law. These folks over here can't. That's what I see as a very disturbing trend in what I've heard my opponent say. What we need is fair and equitable prosecution. That's what we have done. As I've indicated, we give a notice before we do a criminal complaint and allow the opportunity for someone to come into compliance.
We're going to take another round from the media, and Mr. Gascoigne, it's your turn to go first.
Mr. Daniel, I'll start with you. As a district attorney, how hands-on would you be? Would you actually prosecute cases in court yourself, or would you leave that to your deputy DAs?
When need be. I think I can make the office efficient enough. You're an administrator first. Your job is to get the goal straight and make sure that you're applying those resources in the direction that we need to go, and I've laid out that direction. When need be. They have sufficient number of prosecutors. They certainly have more investigators, the ratio to prosecutors than most places. They have the tools and the resources they need. If I need to try a case because there's some reason, fine. But I'm not going to do it because I just want to show off in front of a jury.
Mr. Ramsey, how do you decide whether you're going to actually prosecute a case or not? What were some of the factors? Because I know that in the past you have prosecuted cases.
Correct. It is the most difficult cases that I prosecute. And those cases such as a no-body homicide, a 25-year-old homicide, a case that had to be retried after that it was overturned by the federal court and tried to bring all those witnesses and sometimes those dead witnesses through transcript back into court and be able to do that case. A case in which I lost because I was not afraid to go to trial, in which 5 people went into an Orville motel room and, or pardon me, 8 people went into the Orville motel room and only 5 came out. There was a gun battle inside, and one of the surviving buyers that came up from Sacramento, Richmond area, I did prosecute on a theory of aiding and abetting a robbery which was tantamount to murder. And so those cases I take. I say that because sometimes people say, well, you just take the slam dunk cases. The DA would take the slam dunk cases. I don't. I take the most difficult cases, and my people respect that. As a leader, I think that you must be in the fore, not behind them, pushing them forward, but in front, leading them with your knowledge and your experience. Thank you.
Mr. Little.
We'll start with Mr. Ramsey. You're an almost lifelong prosecutor. Your opponent is almost lifelong attorney. How would the office differ under that type of leadership?
I'm sorry, which kind of leadership?
If your opponent were to win, what sort of leadership would you expect from somebody with an attorney's background? And I would ask him. You.
Well, we're both attorneys. And so you have to be an attorney to be district attorney. That's one of those small things that's in the law. The issue that we see is making sure that there is that experience that is there to, as a prosecutor. People say, well, attorney's an attorney's an attorney. That's just absolutely untrue. A prosecutor has to build a case beyond a reasonable doubt. That means the burden is on that prosecutor to build a very tight case. Defense attorney does not have to. Defense attorney only needs to raise a reasonable doubt. Analogy would be the prosecutor as the mason that builds a cathedral to last for all time. Defense attorney could be the vandal that takes that one brick out, that one important brick, to bring it down. And as I tell my attorneys, they better be a better defense attorney than the defense attorney that they are facing, because they've got to know in building the case what all the defenses may be or may be dreamed up to be to handle that particular case and see that justice is done, but also not to be afraid that if something happens during trial, and trials are dynamic beasts, as it were, that if it shows that you don't have the case beyond a reasonable doubt, that if you have a doubt in your own mind, that justice demands and ethics demands that you dismiss that case. Thank you.
So the flip side is, do you need years of prosecuting experience? I know you have a few months Do you need years to be an effective district attorney?
Well, if we're looking at the flip side, you could say that Mr. Ramsey, with all of his years, has no experience being a defense lawyer, so he would be incompetent being a defense lawyer, if you want to take that same logic, okay? So clearly, being a defense lawyer, you're at the same table. I've gone toe-to-toe with people of equal experience and more experience, okay? The defense has the job to prove to the jury. Now, I know technically the burden is on the people to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, but we all know when you try cases that the jury just assumes if someone was arrested, they must be guilty. And so you really have to show them, not just some reasonable doubt, you have to convince them based on their collective understanding and the evidence that your person is innocent of that charge. You're responsible for somebody's life and their liberty and their reputation when you're a defense lawyer. Now, I can take all of that and I can teach the prosecutors, look, you find loopholes as a defense attorney, and those loopholes are created by the prosecution's investigation. So you can tighten all that up to make sure that your prosecutions are primarily airtight. So it's an advantage to come from the defense point of view, but I've done both. So to say, well, you know, on one hand, you've been a prosecutor, but not for 30 years, I say, on the other hand, my opponent here is incompetent to be a defense lawyer. And that doesn't make any sense either. So if you look at it logically, I think you'll answer your question.
Follow up or no? Ms. Doherty.
Mr. Daniel, I was wondering, as district attorney, what your policy would be regarding charging children in adult court.
Well, it depends on the crime. And you've got to look at these cases seriously to see whether or not their conduct should be judged something that we'd want to go through the adult route. When you're dealing, and when you say children, are you talking what age?
17 and younger.
Well, you know, science shows that their brains aren't fully developed or cooked until they're about 25 or 26. And so there's some behavior you're going to expect. And it just depends on the nature of the crime. It depends on the history of the person. It depends on the sophistication of the crime, which is part of the nature. It depends on the individual. It's not just one little factor alone. You've got to look at everything globally and make that good call.
Okay. For Mr. Ramsey, I was wondering...
Same question or different?
Similar.
Okay.
I was wondering if you could explain your rationale in that matter in the case of Gregory Wright.
Certainly. First of all, it should be noted that when we make a decision to try a minor as an adult, the first thing that drives it is the quality or dastardliness of the crime. We have, over the last, well, probably 8 years, averaged 1 to 2 juveniles that we try as an adult. 1 year was high because there was a number of gangbangers that were 17 that we had. I think there was about 4 that particular year. But in terms of Gregory Wright, if you recall, Mr. Wright was a person that with a fairly significant juvenile record prior to him coming to Las Plumas High School on that fateful day with a sawed-off pistol with the serial number cut off with the specific intent to kill a romantic rival. Luckily, that particular child was not there that day. He went into a classroom. He took hostage over 20 students, young students, and he decided to shoot into the ceiling of that particular classroom to prevent law enforcement from coming in. His attitude towards that crime was pretty revealing. On the hostage tapes, on his interview afterwards with law enforcement, showed that he was someone that should be tried as an adult. He committed not only a very serious crime, In an adult crime, he was acting very much as an adult. We, however, out of compassion to him, made him an offer that he could get out of prison in 7 years. He chose to take 22 years.
Thank you. It's time for closing arguments. Mr. Ramsey, as the winner of the coin toss, you will go first.
I thought I lost, but that's okay. It was an interesting toss. Well, again, I want to thank the League of Women Voters for this opportunity. Now, we've spoke about a lot of subjects, and certainly we can talk about a lot more subjects. But one subject that I wanted to kind of hit a little bit more on was my staff. And I'm particularly proud of that staff, the investigators, the support and clerical staff, the attorneys. And I'm proud of the fact that my staff has some of the longest experience and tenure of any department in the county. They stay because they love their job and because of the environment that we have made for them in their work. Those who read or watch out-of-county news media see that district attorney races in other counties are rather contentious because the deputy district attorneys are no wallflowers in those offices. They are by nature attorneys and contentious. They divide up in their support of the incumbent. Well, I'm proud of the fact that the Butte County Deputy District Attorneys Association, a group of some 23 deputy district attorneys, have unanimously supported me in this bid. And they join every law enforcement agency in Butte County, the police chiefs, sheriff, former sheriff, and every police officers association. The question you need to ask yourselves in this is, what candidate is best suited to keep Butte County safe? Who knows the community best? Who has the most experience in prosecuting serious crime? Who has the experience in managing an office? Who has the confidence and trust of local law enforcement? And who is not beholden to any special interest? I ask you to join those folks in supporting me. Thank you.
Mr. Daniel.
Thank you. I also want to thank everyone for their time tonight and their careful attention. I want to do some reality checks. Everything I've said is based on something that's documented, something you can look up, something that is true. Let's start with the current administration's long and notorious record of failure that's well documented. You have the auto body cases. These are people that were businessmen. They were paraded in front of the cameras saying, if you're doing business with them, you're doing business with a crook, or words to that effect. Not one conviction in that case. You know why? Because the investigation was so bad that they either got thrown out or they were dismissed. Now, somebody with years and years of experience leading that ship that can't see how bad the evidence is shouldn't have gone forward with those to start with. Secondly, there's been a ton of money wasted on cases, taxpayer money, your money, that are frivolous. Frivolous means they don't have evidence. Raids that were made were supposedly there was some toxic substances being washed down a drain by fire hoses, and then when the people show up, there's no fire hoses, there's no toxic substances, but what there is, uh-oh, we spent all this money, we need to get it back from you. There's prosecution for profit. We live in an environment where the prosecution rate in this county is among the lowest. You can look it up. Now, if you want to take my opponent's position and say we're in the middle, then they're saying, well, we're mediocre. And the people of this county deserve a lot better than just mediocre from the prosecutor's office. I think that when you look at the whole picture and learn the facts here, you'll find out that there are ways of getting compliance without wasting taxpayer money. There are ways of investigating cases that will prove to increase public safety, which is what I intend to do, and I appreciate your attention.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll just take a quick break.